where history's shadows cast long, unsettling doubts, the truth lies buried. From cryptic wartime codes to assassinations that scarred generations, unearth the secrets the world tried to forget. Hosts Tim Gardner and Eli Frame guide you through a labyrinth of unanswered questions, where every clue pulses with danger and intrigue, and perhaps an opinion or two. It's not all facts because history never is. Welcome to the Ciphered Past.
Welcome everybody to a new episode of Ciphered Past, episode 38. We are pleased to have you guys with us tonight. We hope you're well. I'm just getting over the COVID spell. Thank goodness I'm starting to get my sense of smell back, and it's been fantastic to actually get back to normal. So hopefully everybody's good. We have part 3 of our series with William J. Pellas and, of course, Charles Small on this episode, and we have a lot to talk about, which is going to be really cool and interesting, and we're glad that everybody is here viewing this. But William J. Pellas, again, you could pick up his book up at Amazon.com. It's called The Japanese Bomb by the Way of Germany. He is a wonderful author, a good friend of the show, and we're honored to have him on. And Charles Small, expert in James Bond, a great friend of mine, and we're pleased to have him as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
All right, Charles, go ahead and kick it off like we did last episode.
All right. So what I do want to do is I want to reflect back real quick to something that you said at the last episode, which is a band I've never heard of before, Igor Vaganov. I know I sent you a list of examples of where he's represented in the books and the movies. I'm going to cut through that because I have now, since that point in time, sort of done my homework, and he is all over the place. I also want to say that I do believe I may have actually found him out in the wild. I say that because there is a culprit that to the JFK assassination that went in hiding after the Suez crisis of 1966, 1967, and it's my understanding that Igor has disappeared after his article in Esquire magazine, I believe it was. I don't have obviously enough evidence to say it is him, but I've been looking for a guy that went missing around that time because I found a guy hiding basically. So a couple of things. We were talking about how the shooting in The Man with the Golden Gun is in parallel to the shooting in Dallas that day. Couple quick things. It was Rene Dosak did the throat shot, according to Douglas Bazada, and then of course, in the book, Felix Leiter shoots a guy in the back of the head. Well, in the book, Rene Dosak is Scaramanga, and Scaramanga travels without an alias. He uses his real name, and of course, in the shootout, they present the name Dosak because the guy who shoots in the throat is holding a sword that's an actual Dosak type sword. Well, Igor Vaganov did travel with aliases, and one of his aliases was Nicholson. So it was like he signed in at the Holiday Inn on the way to Dallas or something like that as Nicholson or something like that. And Felix Leiter, his alias is Nicholson. So what I'm saying here is that Nicholson shot a guy in the back of the head in that book. Same alias as Igor Vaganov. The other is I'm going to go over one more example. This is probably a whole nother show to itself, but I don't really know much about the guy. I don't think anybody knows much about the guy. That's the real problem. In the musical score to License to Kill, which that movie is mostly about Jerry Cobb. They've got two ballet movements and a modern interpretive dance while they're singing the song License to Kill in the little music video there. The first one is the Firebird Leap, which originated in the ballet composed by Igor Stravinsky in 1910. And the second major ballet movement as they're dancing, this performative modern dance, is the Grand Jeté Leap, the Vaganov style. It's an actual school of dance that developed a type of dance, and it's in sequence. So they literally are doing an interpretive dance, and on the screen is Igor and Vaganov in sequence in those two ballet movements of the two that developed the names of the people that developed those movements. All right, so we're going to move on from Igor. The next thing, what I want to do is reemphasize. I'm trying to bring the different research communities together. This is all one big secret history. I think I'm coming across from the James Bond research community at this point, as much as I've gone into all the movies and the books and so forth. And I want to tell you, I'm going to be a little jovial about it. The James Bond research community, I want to say it's like sunshine and rainbows. We're all happy because we're all just fans. We love to talk about James Bond, and it's great. But what I want to say is that I didn't come up with these things. In my online communications, I bumped into an old guy who said back in the 70s, they were talking about how the book, The Man with the Golden Gun, was about the JFK assassination. I'm going to mention a guy's name by the name of Matt Sherman. He's got some great online articles, and he has been saying it's about the JFK assassination. And he has been conducting the research in a very academic setting where they attend academic conventions on an annual basis and do presentations on the writings of Ian Fleming. He even thinks that Ian didn't write the book, The Man with the Golden Gun, or it's these ideas I'm coming up with. I'm not the guy. I'm standing on the research of others, and there is a long-standing understanding that the stories of James Bond and Ian Fleming are all based in truth. Ian said it was all based in truth. He said if he exposed any more, he would be in violation of the
They take
Secrecy
that
Act.
very seriously in the UK. Very seriously
Yeah,
to this day. If I can give you a quick example of
go please.
British
Go ahead.
culture.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't a movie, but it's an absolutely accurate portrayal. Have you guys seen the movie Where Eagles Dare? You've seen it, Charles. Have
Yep.
you seen it, Tim? Okay. Fantastic World War II movie. Uh, Arguably the most entertaining, not necessarily the most factually accurate, but certainly one of the very best. But anyway, at the end of the film, you realize that Richard Burton has been running a counterintelligence sting the whole time, and they're up there in the Junkers 52. They just took off. Most of the operatives are have died. He's there with just his few cohorts, Clint Eastwood and Mary Urey, and then the other guy, I can't remember the actor who played him, but his character's name is Turner, Colonel Turner, and Turner, it turns out, is a Nazi mole in British intelligence. He's totally British, but he's working for the Nazis, and so Burton confronts him and just busts him on everything, and Turner finally says, "Well, suppose I was," and Burton says, "You're finished, Colonel Turner." And at that point, Turner looks at him and says, I don't seem to have any more cards to play." And Burton says, "There is one, if you want it." And then he looks hard at Burton, and he opens the door, and he jumps out of the plane, commits suicide. Why? Because before that he said, if this got out, it could be embarrassing. You know? So, I mean, a little bit of a lengthy lead up there, but the point is that still means something even today in British society, and you can understand why they're a lot like Japan in that regard because they're very densely populated in a small physical space, right? And there's not much privacy in the sense that we're accustomed to in the United States of America. And so, for that reason, among other, cultural indicators, the Official Secrets Act in England, in the UK, to this day, is adhered to much more strictly than the classifications at NARA and in some other national archives. Although you can get in real trouble at NARA too. If you want to find it, you'll find it. But it's still much more strict in the UK. I do agree with you entirely, Charles, and this is for you too, Tim. I think what we're actually looking at here, is really a continuum in which all three of these research communities, in many cases, without really realizing it, although I mean, I should say, Charles and I, Tim, are hopeful that this will serve to knit some of these communities together because there is overlap between them. Um, but of the three, if we're looking at the Bond community, the Axis nuclear weapon community, and the JFK community, I would say Charles's is most jovial. Mine is somewhere in the middle, and JFK is raving lunatics, right? Uh, Now we have lunatics in the Axis community too, and there are few topics that bring out the nut jobs like the idea of the Nazis having nuclear weapons. It's like, well, again, I don't, I could talk on this for days. I'll just say that I have come to the conclusion that there are people who are invested in a particular narrative and an underlying worldview, which has to do with how they see themselves. And this intersects with the post World War II, uh, I guess, for lack of a better term, liberal, globalist, international, geopolitical order, all these buzzwords that they like to throw around. Um, and people that are on board with that desperately want to believe that there was never any doubt about who was going to win World War II. That's a lie. They desperately want to believe that Nazi ideology, which I'm not advocating, I'm going to make that clear, but what I'm saying is that the people that I've run into desperately want to believe, and they'll say it, they'll come right out and say it. Oh, well, Nazis couldn't do anything, any science because they're pooper heads, they're booger brains, they're Nazis, and we're so much better than that. I'm like, you know, the irrationality and the unfactuality, if that's a term, or the lack of factuality, is just astonishing with these people. And and if you challenge them to produce primary source documents, okay, have you been to NARA? Yes, no. Do you have photos of actual declassified National Archive U.S. official documents? Yes or no? If you don't, why are you calling me names and telling me that Wikipedia is somehow the authority here? And then we can get into We mentioned this on the first show, and the only reason I'm not going to tell you this name right now is because I can't afford a lawyer and he might sue me. But I will tell you for a fact, and Charles is laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. I've gone toe to toe with an editor from Wikipedia several times. This guy is totally in bed with the heretofore conventional narrative, which is a joke. It is a joke. It goes back to Samuel Goldschmidt, who was plainly acting as an arm of American officialdom, and he put out a handful of talking points in his 1945 congressional testimony, his 1947 book. All of the so-called conventional historians take that as holy writ, and all of their books are simply a rehash of Goudschmidt. Now, some of them are much better than others. Richard Rhodes is probably the apex of the heretofore conventional history. And I don't have anything against these people, but you have to understand that there's two major points here, and I'll try to wrap this up a little as quickly as I can. The 2 points are these. It was not until 1995, 50 years after the end of World War II, that the great majority of long classified, and I'm talking secret, top secret, above top secret documents having to do with the German nuclear weapons program that were kept at NARA, National Archives and Records Administration. That's the United States official archives. That's your government, okay? That's not me making it up. I didn't write these documents. Charles didn't write these documents. I don't think you did, Tim. And I know Todd Ryder and Robert Wilcox didn't. I mean, I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious, but the point is, okay, so let me finish the first point first. These documents did not get declassified until 1995. Almost every single one of the books that the so-called conventional historians will wave in your face, almost without exception, they were written prior to 1995. So even if they were not invested for reasons that have nothing to do with history in these other narratives that they desperately want to believe, even if that was off the table and they were being honest, and I think some of them were, honestly, others definitely were not. But the point I'm getting at is they did not have access to all of this information. They did not. Nobody did in the public. It was off limits. I mean, is this so hard to comprehend? What is so difficult here?
There's even parallels.
You know,
There's even parallels with the JFK assassination, right?
oh yeah.
So like if you look at like what before Oliver Stone released JFK in 1991, right? We didn't have any good information on the CIA. We didn't have any good information unless you were like an independent researcher, like a Harold Weisberg or Salandria or any of these like pioneers, like Mark Lanes or whatever. So the public didn't have that information. It was these guys who actually they took the time to actually, spend their money to do all this stuff, like on their time, and they were able to actually go to like you mentioned, William. They went to NARA and they were able to do the research themselves on certain things. Weisberg was pardon my language, he was an asshole to these people. He was so, he was, this guy is probably like, if we want to talk about like an animal, he was like either the Wolverine. I mean, the guy was such a jerk to everybody, but he got everything that he was looking for. I mean, he didn't get everything. He didn't get the smoking gun, but he was forcing his way to get information. And you nailed it, William. I mean, like it took like years and years and years and years, and unfortunately, it took with Oliver Stone's film for the public to go, oh, there's more to this than just Lee Harvey Oswald.
Fan of him, but I mean, he did a service by pointing to the Jim Garrison investigation. The House investigation, which came, I guess, about 10 years after the Warren Commission, and definitely was a much more honest proceeding. I think, but So anyway, so this is what we're dealing with, and so the second point I wanted to make is that I think all of these communities, as I say, often without realizing it, are all really digging into the broader hidden history of the 20th century. And that's produced the world that we're living in now. And so, and the reason why all of these communities are related is for the simple fact that many of the same people were involved, right? I mean, we have Charles's great uncle who carried all the way through World War II and into the Kennedy years and beyond. We have Paperclip and also the deal with Hans Kammler from the SS, where all of these German scientists, engineers, technicians not only were developing nuclear weapons for Germany, they just ended up with not enough at war's end, and so they turned them into bargaining chips, which purchased the freedom of some of them. And, this ended up producing ultimately the Apollo moon landings. Those were Germans, a lot of them. And then you carry over into JFK, and of course we've already talked about some of the secret operatives from the OSS, from Sonderkommando and others that were involved almost certainly in the JFK assassination. And we're looking at the hidden architecture and the hidden machinery of the 20th century. All three of these communities are. And I think if they can recognize that and come to some coordination, I think the efforts would be that much more fruitful.
Well, I mean, okay, but I think the World War II community goes hand in hand with the JFK community because um, I mean, it basically is a roadway to, like we said in our first episode, to the JFK assassination. Whether like we have that bridge from like Eisenhower or Truman, who created the CIA post OSS to, see, here's a problem. A lot of people want to make it where they have the red herring here, the red herring there, the red herring here. That's what the CIA wanted. That's what the establishment has always wanted. They wanted to have people look the other way, whether it be James Files, whether it be Roscoe White, whether it be all these other people that we always pay attention to, right? But the problem is, underlying factor of the JFK assassination is basically, so if somebody like were to meet my wife and sleep with her, I would probably kill the guy, or like maybe not kill the guy, but I would be upset with him, right? So if I was a young hotshot president who basically took a veteran of the intelligence field and said, okay, well, you're fired, so is General Cabell, and all these other guys that are part of this. I mean, you're gonna reap what you sow on that. And I mean, Kennedy had his own agenda about this, but I mean, like, when it comes to like really cut and dry like facts about it, you have to look at the CIA. You have to look at Alan Dulles. You have to look at like the people that were associated with William Harvey. You have to look at, obviously David Atlee Phillips and all the people that were like puzzled in with this whole thing. The problem is that we, as a society, we like to get really enthralled with like the latest things that happen. Like, we hear stories about like, no, I was, there was a guy in the back, a car with when he was in the, pardon me, he was with the Secret Service, and he was a car back of the, from the Kennedy vehicle, and he decided to actually deploy his machine gun, and he hit Kennedy multiple times. That's bullshit. Okay. Sorry. And then you talk about the driver Greer turning around, shooting Kennedy in broad daylight. Don't you think that there would be any witness at all that would be like, okay, we saw the driver turn around and shoot the president? Nobody at all did that. It's ridiculous, okay? And then we just get into these different, like, and that's the thing that they want us to do, is they want us to sit there and focus on all these different things, get frustrated by it, and what the real underlying factor is. And in my opinion, Right now, everybody wants to talk about Israel. Israel this, Israel that, Israel this, Israel that. Okay. Is it really that big? Maybe. Okay. But in my opinion, I think that an agency, and William knows this greatly, is, I mean, so do you, Charles, about your uncle. An agency basically runs our country. They've ran our country for the past 70 years and plus years. They have. And so the fact is that you have a guy that basically wants to override them, and then you can use any excuse. He's an adulterer. He's trying to make peace with our enemy. This and that and this and that and this and that. People excuse that. But no, let's go and like blame Israel and this and that. I mean, yeah.
There's well, now if I may jump in on that, I will give you one potential motivation for Israel slash Mossad to possibly have been involved in the JFK assassination. All right, no, no, that's fine. And by the way, I'm not. This is simply due diligence. I'm not saying this is absolute fact, but I will give you a couple of facts. Okay. Um, First of all, contrary to what various people say, here again is disinformation. Israel absolutely has a sizable nuclear and thermonuclear arsenal. They What happened was a number of Jewish scientists who were involved in the Manhattan Project, some from France, went to the newly refounded nation of Israel in late 1940s, 1948, and soon afterward, probably through their connections in France, Charles de Gaulle saw to it that a French designed reactor was sold to, or basically given to, the Israelis. Now, this became the Dimona, Dimona, Dimona nuclear site in the Negev desert. That's where it is to this day. And the Israelis, who are master improvisers, basically turbocharged this reactor, which now is still running, 65 years later. It's still cranking out plutonium, probably a lot more than most estimates think. The bottom line is that Israel probably has on the order of 300 bombs and warheads, maybe more, a mix of tactical atomic fission bombs, free gravity bombs, neutron bombs, thermonuclear hydrogen bombs. Okay. Now, this did not happen in a vacuum, and John F. Kennedy was very much concerned with nuclear weapons proliferation. He was against Israel developing their nuclear arsenal. That's a fact. Now, what his successor, Lyndon Johnson, was perfectly happy to look the other way while the Israelis got their plutonium production up and running. They started designing bombs and warheads. And, as a matter of fact, if you look into this, during the 1967 war, the first of the Israeli nuclear weapons were prepared. They were ready to be used in combat. It came very close, both in 67 and 73, or 70, I guess it was 73. So Israel was given the green light by Lyndon Johnson. John F. Kennedy was leaning on them very hard to drop their nascent nuclear weapons program. So, now again, I'm not jumping on the everybody hates Israel bandwagon. I'm not a conspiracy theorist in that regard. But what I've just told you is entirely factual. And I'm just throwing that out there as part of the list of people and organizations, as we talked before, who had the means and who had the motive. Well, okay, I'm not saying they did it, but they did have the motive and they did have the means. So,
I, and I agree, but I believe that those things can be mutually exclusive when it comes to the CIA as well, right? So because the fact that you look at James Angleton and how close he was to Israel and like his connections with Israel, right? So we could look at that, right? But my thing is that again, with the track record of Alan Dulles, and again, we've talked about, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, like with Lumumba and the DM brothers in South America, and I mean, even like you just mentioned with De Gaulle. I mean, there's a track record there with all that, and as much as I don't like, okay, excuse me, as much as I disagree with Jefferson morally, right? He brings up a really good point. You have to look at the fact patterns, right? And that lines up directly with the CIA. It lines up directly with the CIA. So, for me, I believe there can be a combination of people and entities that are involved with this. I'm not excluding anybody. What I am doing though, actually, I'm going to be a hypocrite to myself just now. I am excluding James Files. I am excluding like these ridiculous stories that are out there about like how there's no fundamental evidence other than the fact that I'm going to go on a little barrage about James Files right now because people need to hear about this, okay? This guy was in prison because he had an association, and this guy was married in 1963, and he was in Chicago in 1963, and there have been people who actually people have notations about this guy. Lisa P's debunked this thing with other researchers. We're talking quality researchers here that know their shit, okay? And for James Files to go out there with his wife who sells books for a living, right? For income, for money, okay? They're selling the public on a barrage of bullshit, okay? And again, I apologize for my language, but that really fires me up because people really buy into this thing. And now we get the Greer theory. People buy into the Greer theory. And now we get into the guy who was in the back limo who shot Kennedy by mistake with his machine gun. I said this earlier. We have all these things that are just absolutely ridiculous and don't mean anything to this whole thing. And it's a red herring, and the CIA is laughing their ass off about all this stupid shit.
All right, so that's the JFK community.
Yeah, no, I'm very passionate about it. I
You're
mean, like,
good. You're good.
I could go off on hours about it, but yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
One more thing I wanted to mention there, in case either of you guys know what this book is. I had bookmarked this a few months ago, and I can't find it. I just did a quick search. I couldn't bring it up, but there was a woman author who was writing about the CIA, and the term she used was spookocracy. That and when your comment about that we've been living under their
Are you talking about Sylvia Mar?
control.
Sylvia Mar.
That
That sounds
sounds
like her.
right.
It's
Do you know the name of the book?
I don't know the book, but her last name is spelled Meagh. I believe it's AR. It sounds like meager, but it's Mar, and she's the one that. Yeah, that sounds like Sylvia. I mean, she basically she read the Warren Commission all volumes, and she like was like, okay, all right. I mean, she dissected it, and she's just basically like, well, okay, they said this. Well, what about this? They said this. Well, what about this? They said this. Well, what about this? She took years of her life to do this, which is absolutely phenomenal. It's crazy.
I think that's who it is. I'll double check. But
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, just to kind of bring this full circle to one of our initial discussions, I'm with you entirely, Tim. That there, I think the most honest term that I can come up with for the JFK assassination is that it gives every indication to my mind of being a violent regime change, right? And there were many people who had what they believed to be compelling reason to, to basically um, conduct a coup. That's really what it was. Johnson, because he was probably going to be investigated and go to prison. The Dulles brothers, because they were angry because they said, "Well, wait a second, who's this? Who's this whippersnapper? We're the ones that negotiated the end to World War II. We're the ones that brought this wonderful, quote unquote, wonderful post-war world into existence. He didn't do any of this. He was just a rich rich snot that Yeah, okay, he was in the Pacific, that's fine, but he was a child of privilege, and
Let
who
me
the
ask
heck
you
is
this.
he? You know what I'm saying?
Let me ask if the Dulles brothers were able to actually pull off what they wanted to pull off, William, right? I mean, our world would be we would be not. I mean, we're screwed up today, right? But we would be like in a oh my god, we would just absolutely be in a world of like hurt right now, like bad.
Yeah, well, fascism with a thin veneer and a phony face of democracy. That's what they want. They want to be the permanent ruling class, the unelected, essentially new globalist aristocracy. That's what they want. But so anyway, all that to say, to tie that into back to the Dulles brothers, um, and there were others, others with them, and a lot of this also, I'm convinced, probably had an organized crime influence in it, and that also goes back to World War II, as we mentioned before. All the gun running and smuggling and underworld networks that the OSS partnered with in World War II. And you see that in some of the more realistically grounded Bond movies. And of course, in all the novels, it's all through the novels. Uh, you know, what was the one, the Roger Moore Bond, where they were trying to get their hands on the Soviet ATAC, and the parrot says ATAC deuce and zeros. Which one was that, Charles? Was that For Your Eyes Only? Thank you. And that one is, in my view, is the most is the Roger Moore movie that was closest to Ian Fleming. I think two or three of the Connery movies were. Most of the Moore movies really weren't, for the most part. That one really was. It was pretty well grounded in Fleming's writing, and that has World War II all over it. Those characters, and the smugglers, and the kind of noble criminals, if you want to, kind of seeing these criminals through rose-colored glasses. But that again, this is the stew that produced the world and produced the landed interest and the moneyed interests that wanted JFK gone, because these people were still in the prime of life. They had a lot of money and a lot of prestige and a lot of tenure, if you like, invested in all of this. Well, who the heck's this guy? So I think probably, I mean, if you want to look at it that way, there was also a bit of a generation gap going on. You had they weren't the old guard, but they were the older guard. It's kind of the same resentment that the 40-year-old fading superstar but still pretty good baseball player feels when the 21-year-old phenom comes up. You know, he's like, listen, snot nose, I've hit 500 home runs. Do you know who I am? Right? And of course, in 20 years, the phenom's going to be looking at the next wave the same way, right?
Yeah, yeah,
This is human nature.
yeah.
Anyway, so that's
So,
just some
so
thoughts.
Charles, I'll let you cut in a second. William, that was a brilliant point. I mean, that whole like, thank you for that barrage. Um, looking at okay, why they had an excuse to eliminate this guy, right? So we see later on down the road, and we hear stories directly that this guy was a womanizer. He would cheat on his wife. Not be there for his when she was giving birth, this and that, and this and that, and this and that, and they're trying to discredit this man over and over. I mean, look, I mean, what we do in our personal lives, I mean, like every one of us, I mean, every one of us has committed a sin, right? Okay, I mean, like we're not perfect, Kennedy wasn't perfect, okay, and regardless, I mean, he had like he had a platform where he can actually he wanted to do what he wanted to do. He had a network of people, and he felt by his father specifically, who was the crown guy of this whole thing, he enabled his sons to be this way. Okay, but then again, you have a mind of your own as a human being. I mean, you should be able to decipher what's wrong and right. He chose his path, so therefore, the agency can look at this. I mean, I find it funny that we have guys like Alan Dulles and all these other guys and the agency that look at Kennedy as a pig when Alan Dulles was like a serial like cheater on his wife, right? And yeah, and there was a reason why she was not in the room with him when he died. She despised him. She absolutely despised Alan Dulles, right? So, and by the way, if people want to read more about that, please do pick up The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot. But that gives you a really good explanation on that. But my point is that William, you brought it up brilliantly. I mean, if they wanted to come up with any excuse to actually get rid of this guy, they would do that publicly, and they did. That's how it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there just were a lot of people and a
Yeah.
lot of powerful interests that, for their own reasons, wanted Kennedy gone. And I think what you had was a convergence, I think is the term, a convergence of people from, in some cases, very disparate backgrounds. The mob, the CIA, the deep state, Lyndon Johnson. All these people all were motivated to have him gone. Now, as to who was directly moving the pieces versus who was looking the other way with a nudge and a wink, I'm not well enough read in the minutiae to really opine one way or the other. But I think it's as far as I'm concerned, that's how a lot of things get done in this world, especially in the dirty deeds. A lot of people like to have plausible deniability. Others are not afraid to get their hands dirty, and usually they come to some admixture of the two: the plausible deniability crowd and the actual dirty deeds crowd. And I think the Kennedy assassination was a notable example in history, if not the best one, where those two camps really came together and said, "Look, we all want this guy gone," and it didn't matter what side of the law they were on. It didn't matter what political party they were on. They just wanted him gone. They just wanted to get rid of him, and they did.
Say it again?
Nobody really knows who shot Kennedy.
Oh,
So I'm not expecting you to know. You wouldn't know. I'm just.
no, but after all, I was around,
Yeah.
and
It really is a terrifying prospect. You've just got a living weapon of destruction.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, no one knows. So you're in there with everybody else.
Well, somebody knows. The one that did the shooting
Yeah, I guess so.
knows, and probably his boss knows.
That's right. Yeah.
But that's not me. That has nothing to do with me.
Right. Yes. No, of
I
course.
didn't like that way of doing business.
I want to talk about that. We've all just listened to it. Obviously, when I just brush upon it real quick, the story of James Bond. Again, I've cracked basically the entirety of all the books and the movies. They are made up of a combination of current United States intelligence, World War II, mostly atomic bomb World War II, and then the JFK assassination. And then my great uncle Jack, he peppered in a lot of personal details into the books and the movies. Those are things that nobody's ever going to be able to find because they don't have access to that information. The biography here, and I hate to bore people with it, but I want to make sure people realize that this man, James Turner Stevens Jr., I call him Jack, he left behind enough there for all of us to see and understand what happened. Now, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty. Well, that can't be true because that guy was standing on the other street corner and that guy was on this street corner. That The point is that it is clear these stories are conveying the underlying a conspiracy theory of the JFK assassination, and once that becomes accepted, then people have to ask, why in the world would the James Bond movies be about the JFK assassination? And also, Jack said he didn't know everything. He had the absolute highest level of intelligence possible. In the White House, he had access to everything except for the living quarters of the President of the United States. He loved JFK. He, as far as the women JFK, he said he used to like all the beautiful women he kept around the White House. He liked looking at beauty every now and then. It was all right. He was, you know, a man. So that audio that we just listened to, that's where he's making sure people know, hey, he was not the guy. Now I want to re-explain just a little bit here. He was the boss. It was his team of men that traveled everywhere the president of the United States went. When the assassination occurred, his team was in the basement of the White House, and his team was with the president. And then his team flew back from Dallas on Air Force One back to Washington, D.C. I've got a photograph of him with his friend, Hank Oneman, and Hank Oneman was on Air Force One flying back. And of course, then Jack was able to hear one side of the conversation. So the way I understood it worked was no individual got to know the whole story. You heard one side of the conversation. You couldn't hear both. And that was a little bit of how they compartmentalized his team of men. But of course, he himself did hear that they were trying to stop Curtis LeMay from launching nuclear weapons. And Curtis LeMay was in Canada. He clearly said Curtis LeMay was in Canada, even though, of course, history says he wasn't there. Um, so I don't know.
Oh, wait a minute, a candidate for wait a minute, Charles. I'm sorry. LeMay was a candidate for what?
Canada. He was in Canada.
Oh, okay.
Did you all have any comments about his audio and the way he expressed how, of course, it was a conspiracy? Effectively, he said that.
Well, I think people like, right off the bat, I mean, like if you look at it years later on, they were so scared. I mean, like I'm not saying Jack was scared at all. It matter.
I think he was scared that he might get blamed for being the guy. So that he was like, "It wasn't me, guys."
Yeah, but I mean, there was a level of like apprehension there for years and years and years upon a lot of people, and I get that. I mean, like you're living like within a bubble of like 1963 to 1970 ish, right, William? I mean, like you're living in that like threshold where you don't have the internet, you don't have like a lot of things that are like that can get exposed out to the public. And if you know something that nobody else knows, and if you say something, you look like a batshit crazy person. That's all I'm saying.
Well, right. Relative to the common understanding that the average person has from the information that is available to the general public, comma, dot, dot, dot. There and again, you have along with that the other cultural factors that we've mentioned before, which is that most Americans are too busy, with their careers and families. They don't have time to read, even if they are of a more curious and more diligent bent. It's really hard to find that and make that time. So, yeah, I mean, and that's by the way, a quick footnote. That is another reason, in my view, in favor of the emergent dissenting history about the Axis nuclear program, because we are talking, as you just mentioned, and Tim, this is particularly relevant to you because you work in the field of computers and AI and all that. So you know that there is a world of difference between what we have today in terms of the instantaneous rapid transmission of information versus what we had then, which was a mostly pre-digital age. The digital information revolution was just starting then. It was just beginning to come online. You look at the Apollo missions, and you had the very beginnings of digital computing in the Apollo moon lander, for example.
Yeah, I gotta get through this, and I know I'm gonna try and read it quickly. I'm gonna try and keep it less than 40 minutes. I know it's like 12 pages here. But mostly I wanted you all to opine on the fact that he's saying there is a department in that audio. He's effectively saying that there is a department that handles the assassinations, and they're the guys that were involved with the JFK assassination. And he's saying that wasn't my department. I didn't want to work in that department. All right, I'm going to start reading, and I'm going to try and get through this quick. I'm sorry if it's a little boring, but this is the biography of a man who lived to be almost 100 years, very full life, and he left a legacy for us to find within the stories of James Bond. So here we go. Jack was born in Richmond, Virginia, October 15th, 1920. Uh, Also, while I read this, I put a lot of peppering in about references to James Bond. His birthday just happens to be the same day of events in the novel The Spy Who Loved Me. As a child, it was known that he was something exceptional about his mind. Jack said he was not quite as smart as Einstein. When he would visit relatives in the countryside, they had a player piano where he spent a great deal of time watching. The player piano was considered the first home computer, and his studying of it was an introduction to turning code into sound. His father worked at a department store called the Kaufmann's, which, by the way, Kaufman happens to be the same name of the assassin in the movie Tomorrow Never Dies. After the Great Depression hit, his parents lost their jobs. At age 11, his mother walked out, abandoning him and his father. I have the custody paperwork from this, and the paperwork is presented in the movie Spectre when James Bond reads his custody paperwork. James Bond's parents uh, died when he was age 11, and then James Bond went to the countryside to live with his aunt. Well, Jack's parents divorced at age 11, and he said it was the most devastating thing in his life. And at that time, they also both lost their homes. He would then be sent to the countryside to live with his aunt, just as James Bond. He was practically an orphan, just as James Bond was an orphan. While his aunt's in the countrysides, while at his aunt's in the countryside, he passed time reading pulp fiction magazines, Argosy. This is where he learned his love of pulp fiction. Growing up in Richmond, he had two best friends. One was a Jewish boy he played tennis with, and the other was a young man that would go on to become the chief editor of the American Journal of Chemistry. At age 16, he was living with his mother and his father's mother and his father's mentally incompetent brother. So his father's out of the equation here. And his grandmother on his father's side and his uncle on his father's side, they turned the dining room into a bedroom. So they were dirt poor. He had a shortwave radio. He ran the antenna to the rooftop, and something happened at that point in time. Jack, at age 60, was placed on an airplane and sent to Washington D.C., where he met FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, in the White House library. I don't know what he did to send him to D.C., but later in life he is connected to an Abwehr agent in Jamaica, Virginia. Abwehr is what is called German subversive agents spread throughout the world. This is 1936, is another point of reference there for timing. We will return to this, but it's likely that Jack cracked a coded Abwehr message and reported it to the FBI. In Wilcox's book, there's a mention of a fake Abwehr network on the East Coast set up to be cracked so as to divert our intelligence agencies in the wrong direction. So it's not unreasonable to believe that a brilliant young man would have been able to crack a German code message if the original intent of the message was to be cracked to begin with. His last year of high school, he was the chief editor of the high school newspaper's front page, and he told his teachers and classmates he wanted to be a journalist for the New York Times. He and his classmates were required to memorize 30 digits of pi. If they failed, then they would have to carry the slide rule. And then there's a picture you're going to see. It's a ridiculous picture, and he's holding this giant, oh no, all of his other classroom mates are holding this giant slide rule. It's like 15 feet long, and of course, he's not holding it because he memorized 30 digits of pi. After he graduated high school, he spent the summer at Fort Belvoir for boot camp. The history of Fort Belvoir, specifically during that year, is a mystery. There's information about the camp up to 1938 and after 1938, but specifically that year remains a mystery. The only information I can find is an obituary of a man that was there that year, and later he went on to encrypt nuclear codes.
Just quick, very quick, I promise. Fort Belvoir. Am I correct in? And I don't have the research in front of me. Wasn't that connected to P.O. Box 1138? I think it was. Just a quick footnote for future reference. P.O. Box 1138. That was an actual. That was an actual P.O. box, and that's all that they called it during World War II. That was a mail drop, and it was connected to a U.S. Army interrogation center that was specifically concerned with interrogating captured Germans who had something to do with their nuclear weapons effort. I think it was affiliated with Belvoir. I'm not certain, but we'll need to check that.
I'll look into that, but I will reflect just a minute. The guys that went through Fort Belvoir were the most intelligent men in the entirety of the armed forces, and they worked on encryption and decryption. He went on to attend the Virginia Tech, where he studied electrical engineering. While there, the yearbook showed that the students would march around giving Heil Hitler salutes. He was not a part of that, as far as I can see, and I doubt he would have been a part, given his best friend from childhood was Jewish. His friends noted in his yearbook that he could speak with knowledge on any subject, and he was the only one they knew that got 2 job offers out of college, which is not too much of a mystery as what those were. He graduated on June the 9th, 1941, where the speaker was the vice president of AT&T. However, he had to graduate with a 2.39 GPA, 1/100th of a point short of honors. He did not finish out his last semester, as he was given leave in March of 1941. So March 1941. He went to New York to work with the British Security Coordinator Office. This office was set up by William Stevenson. This man is whom Ian Fleming called the real deal. The purpose of the office was to promote propaganda to bring the United States into World War II. Ivar Bryce, also the name Leiter isn't there. He was Ian Fleming's best friend, was working in that office to fabricate fake documents to help convince Roosevelt to support England further in their war against Germany. They hired American men and Canadian women in this office. Jack worked there under the cover of being a telephone man for AT&T. He would operate underground wiretaps to foreign consulates. On April the 23rd, he was sent with other men to counter-protest the Charles Lindbergh America First rally in Madison Square Gardens. The result was a riot where Jack suffered a severe injury to his lower back, leaving a deep scar. This scar was then represented in the movie From Russia with Love. This makes sense because the underlying story of From Russia with Love is the story of St. George defeating the dragon, and April 23rd was St. George Day. While in New York, Jack described only one restaurant where he was at with other secret agents. He described the restaurant as being a basement restaurant. The only restaurant that matches that description and was also a hotbed for secret agents was Nick's Casino Bar, believe it or not, that's what it was called. As Jack had a mind almost out of Einstein, I believe that this is where they were using Jack as a sort of gimmick approach to anger Abwehr agents that were known to frequent this restaurant. This would be the true origin story of Casino Royale. Ian did say that he got the story from gambling in Spain. However, William Stevenson said that what Ian said was wrong, and the origin story actually came from somewhere else. While there, he learned that Russian agents were able to call Moscow. However, it was illegal to call Moscow, and through typical legal methods, one could not call Moscow even secretly without the communication being at risk of being decrypted. On May 27th in New York, Project X was created. It was the project to create a vocoder. At this time, the vocoder would be very rudimentary. The vocoder was the next step after a voder. A voder is a keyboard type of instrument that can be played like a piano, but it can be made to sound like a voice with fully recognizable sentences. It's a neat instrument, and I recommend you Google it. Jack at one time said he had the patent. he could have had the patent on the vocoder. Today, the vocoder is in every mobile phone and in many other devices. During World War II, a more sophisticated vocoder was developed for all Allied high-level communications. The vocoder was presented in the movie Diamonds Are Forever as one is implanted in Blofeld's, the villain Blofeld's, throat. While working in this British intelligence office in New York, Jack was a code breaker. During that time, Ivar Bryce was working on the South American division, and any intercepted messages that would have been sent back to New York for decrypting. A specific AdWire communication between Galen's Max network in Europe communicated with agents in Argentina using a Gronsfeld cipher with the key of pi. The communication was where the South American agents were seeking permission to place limit mines on ships with timers so that they would sink far out to sea, and it was suspected that they were sunk by submarines. By the way, these types of limit mines were portrayed in the novel Live and Let Die. The coded message was quickly cracked in 1941. It may have also been yet another forgery created by Ivar Bryce in order to fill Jack's mind with information he thought was real, such as being able to crack the code to begin with. On May 28, 1941, Ian Fleming, Admiral Godfrey, and Jack all went to Washington, D.C. Admiral Godfrey presented a list of forgeries created by the British office in an effort to convince FDR to support the British against Germany. Perhaps Jack was just one of these forgeries. While Jack was there, he witnessed that the British commandeered the White House code room and called someone west of Tokyo. I don't want to repeat that. He told me repeatedly, so I want to make it very clear, there were only British agents in that code room of the White House. After graduation, Jack was sent to Tokyo. This was his first mission. He was sent to sabotage the island of Matsuo. We spoke about that last episode. He was a no-go, but he was in Tokyo for a few days. He was matched with a Japanese prostitute. The Richard Sorg spy ring was the spy ring he was working with, and they spent much of their time in Tokyo whorehouses. He returned to the United States, where he spent much of his time in Philadelphia, where he worked on crosstalk balancing. Crosstalk balancing was an effort to reduce crosstalk on long-distance phones. You make a call, you used to be able to hear other people speak, and at the end of the day, that also is another way of doing wiretaps, because you can't get rid of it. In the fall, he was sent back to Tokyo. By this time, Germany has invaded the Soviet Union. He was flown to Moscow around the time of the Battle of Moscow. I'm not sure before or after. And parachuted out, where he then took the Siberian rail to Vladivostok and then flew to Tokyo. While in Tokyo, he worked with the Richard Sorg spy ring and stayed in a safe house. He was traveling with a tourist visa. While there, he worked to create what I call the 007 phone call. A phone call originated from Hawaii, went to Tokyo, where he received it, and then he smuggled the phone call under the cover of a fake Soviet company dialing across Siberia to Scandinavia and then to Berlin, where the central office phone number for Berlin in 1941 was 007. He then continued to dial until he was able to communicate to Spain and then England and then on to New York and the White House, and finally back into Hawaii, where they knew the call went around the world as they heard the phone on the other side of the room ring. He could not listen to this encrypted call. The timing of the call appears to be around the time that Roosevelt may have made the demand on Stalin to allow freedom of religion in his country. Smuggling of this call across Berlin is alluded to in the smuggling across Berlin in the movie The Living Daylights. Later, Jack went to the Ginza district to purchase a Lilliput robot toy. He used American money, which alerted the storekeeper to alert the police. While he was being arrested, there was a Polish man on the street that pointed out to the police about Jack that he was a bum, a term for a Yankee soldier. The Lilliput robot is referenced in both Dr. No and in the movie No Time to Die. What is fascinating to think is why he would be buying a toy. Perhaps he had a child on the way with this young woman he was set up with in Tokyo. James Bond in the story, You Only Live Twice, had a child with a young bride along with amnesia, where he was set to live out happily ever after the rest of his years. When he was captured, he was waterboarded, and he revealed the intelligence he had in his head. After he spent time in prison, where they treated him well because he was a foreign officer, at some point in time they knocked a couple of his teeth out and replaced them with stainless steel dentures. Those are described in the novel The Spy Who Loved Me, The Man with the Golden Gun, and the movie character Jaws, and two of the James Bond movies. And of course, I have those stainless steel. Japanese showed Richard Zorg, who also had been captured, a photograph of a man that matches Jack's description and asked if this mystery man was working with Max Clausen, Richard Zorg's radio man. Max Clausen also had a fake company, which might have been the company that Jack used to make the phone call. Max also worked in cars in Tokyo, and the only description of a man in Tokyo that Jack gave was a man that worked on cars. The working on cars by a secret agent is portrayed in the movie Goldeneye. Also, Richard Zorg is written about in the novel From Russia with Love. While Jack was in prison, his mother wrote to him at the cover address that was given to her. In her letter, she underlines the words "will return." These are the words at the end of many James Bond movies. I speculate that she may have been able to utilize her boss, Mr. Tolheimer, to negotiate with the State Department to help bring Jack. Tolheimer had powerful friends in the State Department and had a long history of bringing refugees to the United States. Most famously, he rescued many Jewish children from Germany during the 1930s. As Jack was set to be executed, but instead he was sent for a secret prisoner exchange after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The only way to avoid execution is for the sentence to be commuted to castration. Only the Emperor of Japan could order the commutation. He was taken to the Imperial Palace, and the method used was kicking. This is portrayed in the novel Dr. No, but of course it is the main form of torture to James Bond in Casino Royale. As a result, the symbol of phi was carved onto his wrist. For James Bond, it was a symbol of psi. Both of these had the same etymological source. Phi was a symbol for castration. The secret prisoner exchange occurred in the Aleutian Islands. I don't know who he was exchanged for, but we did exchange a Japanese spy for an unknown agent of ours, and that Japanese spy went on to develop the Zhao cruiser made to counter the American cruiser of which this Japanese spy had information on. In the movie Die Another Day, the torture of the castration is portrayed, and there is a secret prisoner exchange with James Bond, and the spy he's traded for in that movie, that spy's name is Zhao, the same as a Japanese cruiser. Back in the United States in 1942, Jack started working for AT&T Long Lines in Washington, D.C. He constructed a safe house at 1420 Columbia Road Northwest. This was considered Washington, too. It was a secondary communication hub for White House should Washington, D.C. be bombed. This was the beginnings of continuity of governance in White House Communications Agency. During World War II, Jack was the main point of contact between the White House and the operatives in the field. The operatives were the operatives that worked with Douglas Bazata. Going back to 1941 for a minute here, from Bazata. Early in 1941, Donovan created the birth of the American Intelligence Agency. He had 38 original agents that worked under him, although there is another account that it may have been 48. Among these originals, Bazata called them, he called them originals, and Jack said he was an original, were about a dozen men that Bazata made a pact with to always do good for the world. Jack was among this dozen men working with Douglas Bazata and Rene Dussac. It was these men that Jack was the liaison with from the White House. In 1943, intelligence was delivered to him about the German progress and plan to drop an atomic bomb, possibly hydrogen bomb, on New York City. He delivered the intelligence to the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey Department. The map makers of this agency were women, and this is where he met his wife, Marion. I'm going to take some time to explain Marion. She was my father's mother's sister. When she married Jack, her sister said that Marion would never have children and certainly wouldn't have children with that man. Jack described her as being English. The rest of these details I'll leave to imagination. However, she attended Duke University and graduated in 1943. She took one course on map making. The map making course was a government-funded course to get women into the industry of making maps. There has been a push to recognize these women, such as Rosie the Riveter, and a poster has been made called Millie the Map Maker. She moved to Washington, D.C., and was with a team of women that were assigned to make the most high-profile maps. I still have her confidential photographs of New York and Washington, D.C. that she used to estimate atomic bomb damage. While at Duke University, she studied under the parapsychology department. The department was funded by Doris Duke, the second richest woman in the world, only behind the Queen of England. Duke was also OSS. She wanted the department at Duke, the parapsychology department, to prove life after death. This is where they developed the Zinser cards. These are the cards that were used to test ESP and remote viewing. Live and Let Die is the only movie to present paranormal existence within the universe of James Bond, where the Bond girl Solitaire used tarot cards for ESP. These teams of women went on to work for the CIA after the war, and many years later, the CIA would in turn experiment on remote viewing. Marion also conducted the maps of Japan to include Tokyo and Hiroshima, among many other cities. For Hiroshima, she said the second set of photographs that came back for her to make follow-up maps ended up with her creating blank maps. For the firebombing of Tokyo, my family asked her how she was able to count all the dead bodies, as that was the deadliest bombing of the war. She said they had their ways. For making maps of the CIA well after the war, we asked her what she made maps of. She said the Earth. Regarding back to her work with the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, Admiral Nimitz declared that they were responsible for the surrender of Japan. Jack spent a great deal of time looking at the photographs of Tokyo from the firebombing, perhaps looking for hope regarding the woman he was there with in 1941. Marion and Jack could not reveal they met on a secret project, so they created a story that their mothers met in Thalheimer's department store where Jack's mother worked. Most likely in 1944, but possibly 1943, Marion went to the southwestern United States to witness an atomic bomb test. This was a test before the Trinity test. This test is alluded to in the book by Robert Wilcox, Japan's Secret War. He obtained information about this test from a man named Angel Alcazar. This agent at one time personally had Hitler as his audience. When World War II ended, Jack was sent to Eastern Europe, where he got on the Siberian Rail and traveled to Inner Mongolia, where he witnessed the results of a Japanese atomic bomb test that occurred there. The best document about this test is in a paper written by Dwight Ryder called Tetsuo Wakabayashi Revealed. It is fascinating as those two names are the two names of the Japanese intelligence officers in the movie You Only Live Twice. In my own research, there is a crater at that location as described. It is called the Halar crater and is not resolved as to how the crater was created, as there is no evidence of a meteor. This is alluded to in the movie Spectre when Blofeld schools Madeline Swan in what a meteor is in an odd scene. I want to get through the rest of the biography, but I want to return to William Pellas to explain Dwight Ryder's research when we get there. When Jack returned to the United States, he married Marion and then was drafted into the Signal Corps. For the first 6 months of 1946, he worked on the 6th Alley, the vocoder, the highest level encryption equipment for the Allies. The most important phone calls that went through the vocoder were transcribed by women. The men that were assigned to the 6th Alley were the most intelligent men in the service. Jack was a lieutenant, had a corporal for a driver, and he carried a machine gun, and he escorted women to the 6th Alley for transcribing the most important phone calls to pass through Paris. That's the first half of 1946. The second half of 1946, he went to Egypt, where he was sent to reinforce the British in the uprising that was occurring in Palestine. Marion and Jack first lived in New York City after they got out of the military in late 1946. He was then recruited into the CIA shortly after. In 1948, Jack was able to catch up with the same Abwehr agent that he was listening to back in 1936. This Abwehr agent spent the prior few years hiding out in his cottage on the Rappahannock River, where he gave the cottage the nickname of Waterview. He was very wealthy and left behind a trust. He wrote his will in the early 1948 and committed suicide in late November 1948. This story was relayed to me by an eyewitness to the events in Jamaica, Virginia. That is the name of the district in Virginia where this cottage existed on the Rappahannock River. This particular story is fictionalized in the short story of Octopussy. It was from this cottage that this agent operated a radio for his espionage activities. The cottage is also represented in the movie Spectre when Bond catches up with Mr. White. It is assumed that the radio was kept in the root cellar, the same place Mr. White hides all of his equipment in the movie Spectre. Octopussy was a short story that also mentions James Bond at the age of 16. As I mentioned before, that was when Jack called the attention of the White House. In 1950, Jack attended the local 4th of July festival in Jamaica, Virginia, and all the locals were abuzz about the story of the spy that committed suicide. The eyewitness to this believed that Jack was an FBI agent. Jack stayed a couple of nights over in the cottage that was owned by the spy in this 1950 visit. At this time, the cottage was owned by a bank, as the trust for this agent went bankrupt. While he was very wealthy when he died, shortly after he died, his trust had to declare bankruptcy. This too is portrayed in the story of Octopussy, as it is likely that his wealth was accumulated through German funds, just as the spy in Octopussy obtained his funds. At night, he visited the house next door to this cottage to visit an old friend, Doc Malone, where he played a night of poker. Doc was actually a doctor of pharmaceuticals. This might be a good time to reflect that all of the James Bond stories, Dr. No and the movie Spectre, are biographies of Jack. This Doc is where he got the name for Dr. No. I have a photograph of Marion on Doc's beach. This is the portrayal of Honeychild Ryder in Dr. No. Honeychild Ryder is singing the song Marion in the novel, a nod to Marion. Then Honeychild Ryder is singing Under the Mango Tree in the movie. A child's story about a mango tree is part of Noor Khan's famous story. The one reference to Noor among many, but the third woman that is portrayed here is the woman Jack knew in Tokyo. The novel is the birth of the trope of the villain volcanic lair. The office of the lair is described as being a lunch office of one of the presidents of one of the largest corporations in the United States. That would be a reference to AT&T, as that was the largest corporation in the world. There's also reference in this Dr. No novel to the large tunnel in the lair, and that is a reference to an engineer that was hired to build the Greenbrier bunker as he developed a superior way of tunneling. While the coat of arms for the name Blofeld was created to be a coat of arms for Noor Khan, the James Bond coat of arms was created to mix both his middle name, Turner, and Marion's maiden name, Pitt. Turner was his great-grandfather's coat of arms. It was a black chevron on a shield with ermine markings on the chevron. Pitt coat of arms has three gold balls. They replaced the ermine markings with the three gold balls to create the Bond coat of arms for James Bond in the story on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Pitt is repeatedly referenced in the stories, especially the story behind the famous Pitt Diamond, also known as the Regent Diamond. It's a story related in the stories of Diamonds Are Forever. It's also related in A View to a Kill. They film it at the location at the guy that bought the Pitt Diamond. And then, of course, the remnants of the Pitt Diamond are portrayed in the movie Octopussy. It just goes on and on. Into 1950s, I'm going to try and quickly go over the operation Jack was involved with AT&T Long Lines. He was head of the plant department. The plant department in charge of operating all long lines communications. This placed him as head of continuity of governance as well. Continuity of governance is where AT&T Long Lines is contracted with the government to rescue members of government during an end-of-the-world scenario such as nuclear war. The work Jack did in his position during the 1950s included being in charge of the President of the United States telephone whenever the President traveled. He built the Garden City Tower, which became the new Washington 2 connection point for calling out of Washington, D.C., should Washington 1 become damaged. He moved closer to the engineer building the Greenbrier bunker to manage its construction. He codenamed it Casper after Ian Fleming's son. He was chair of the committee that was made of NBC, ABC, and Mutual, the three major networks. In case there was a disaster and AT&T only had enough resources to reestablish communications for the networks, he could decide which network would be repaired. In that position, he would be placed in the position of deciding who was able to address the nation in the situation of a crisis and disaster. He worked on the communication with Telstar, the first intercontinental broadcast of television. He also worked with Syncom 2 and worked to build the Washington, D.C. Moscow hotline as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He worked in the basement of the White House. The Red Line, yeah. Yeah. He said he built the Red Line. He worked in the basement of the White House during the Cuban Missile Crisis to maintain the telephone connection to the Prime Minister of England. He worked on Study Group 11 of the United Nations CCITT Committee, now ITU, International Telecommunications Union. His work on Study Group 11 resulted in the creation of Signal System 6 that was the birth of the World Wide Web. It was also called Aristotle, while the individual's computers were called Ramses. To reflect for a moment here, we spoke about Aristotle in the prior episode. Ramses was Richard Sorge's code name, and the tomb of Ramses is portrayed in The Spy Who Loved Me. These computers would later be exposed by Edward Snowden as a method to spy on the whole world. Edward Snowden is then referenced in the movie Spectre. In the movie Spectre, during the funeral scene, the camera specifically focuses on the glasses that both Bond and Blofeld are wearing, and they are wearing the Snowden brand name sunglasses. The whole movie is a portrayal of the creation of the global electronic spying system that Jack helped build for AT&T long lines. Jack helped to lay an undersea cable in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. He laid the undersea cable to Alaska in 1956. He also laid the cable to Virgin Islands, where it could communicate with SYNCOM 2 and then back to Tangier for the secondary connection to Moscow and the hotline. Where people say JFK built a back channel so that he could call Moscow, it was Jack that built this channel. SYNCOM 2 was capable of handling one phone call, and of course Tangier is portrayed in the movie Spectre. Jack worked all over Alaska to help build the early warning system to detect incoming Soviet nuclear missiles. He also worked in NORAD, building that bunker and communications headquarters. A quick reference back to Dr. No. Dr. No is a literal representation of the Lilliput robot. I guess it's kind of out of order there. In 1952, Rene Dussac had his security clearance revoked. I don't know if the next is related or not, but that is because this is not in the history books. But Dad told me the next thing was extremely important, and Jack said it was a national emergency. In spring 1953, Jack went to almost every long lines office in the country to find a ground fault. This would be where someone had cut into the long lines and was either listening in or transmitting false communications. Jack's notes imply that his handling of subduing this national emergency resulted in the armistice of the Korean War. It was April 13, 1953, the Casino Royale was first published. That was Jack's mother's birthday. The books were a gift to her. Around the mid-1950s, she started a small dress shop in Richmond, Virginia, with another executive of the Tolheimer department store that she worked at. She sold her share to this other executive in the late 1950s, and afterward, this other executive wrote a letter demanding that the business activities be reported to the IRS. She was accusing Jack's mother of money laundering. She had made about $200,000 in just a few short years. That's $2 million in today's money. She was laundering the money Jack was getting paid for the sales of the books of James Bond. Shortly after JFK was elected President of the United States, Life magazine published an article of his favorite books. Number 8 of 20 books listed was From Russia with Love as one of his favorite. It was the only fiction book on the list. As a result of this, James Bond novels became extremely popular, and their success created a situation where the first James Bond movie was created. Jack used to talk about joining JFK in the dining room at times, and he appreciated the beautiful women that JFK kept around the White House. More than anything, Jack wanted to end wars. He said, quote, "My generation should have had sense enough to get rid of war." I know he very much appreciated JFK's goal for peace. On October the 15th, 1962, he worked the cable that came from Australia, where there was a tip-off to assassinate JFK. On November the 19th, 1963, Jack's mother died of a heart attack. Jack was on assignment in Mexico City when this happened. He ordered an autopsy because he believed his mother was murdered. Her funeral was scheduled for 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This was the exact minute that JFK was declared dead. Jack had to leave his mother's funeral report to duty. This funeral scene is portrayed in For Your Eyes Only, The World Is Not Enough, and No Time to Die. And The World Is Not Enough, the funeral scene occurs at a cemetery for the King family. I don't mean the King of England, but the family name, King. The cemetery where Jack is burying his mother is in an old farm cemetery that belonged to the King family. In the other two movies, the leaving of the cemetery results in a major ordeal for James Bond. Jack reports to duty at the Virginia State Police headquarters. There is a communications tower and an underground bunker. There, LBJ tells him he is the most ignorant man to come down the road. He's able to listen to one side of the telephone call while Air Force One flies back to Dallas. Curtis LeMay was in Canada, in charge of the embassy there, trying to launch nukes. They were called LeMay. While most all of the long-distance telephone lines were down that day, Jack was able to patch the telephone call from Air Force One through the Garden City Tower that he had built back in 1950 to the White House in order to take control and prevent nuclear war. The story of Rene Dussac and his version of the assassination of JFK was relayed to Jack through Douglas Bazzana. Both Jack and Bazada told the same story that they learned about the assassination when it interrupted over the New York Philharmonic. The New York Philharmonic was playing live over the radio the music to the opera Fidelio. This opera is about the freeing of a prisoner. This opera is referenced in the movie Quantum of Solace, as the opera Tosca is very similar to the theme in the freeing of a political prisoner. In the story of JFK, Jack was the political prisoner, and the assassination of JFK sealed his fate of no longer being free. He had to live out the rest of his days as a unique form of a political prisoner. He could leave freely, but no one could know who he was. He took the story he received from Douglas Bazada and created the story of the man with the golden gun, as discussed in the prior episode. Almost immediately after the assassination, Jack met with LBJ in the White House in a room near the Oval Office. There he gave his intelligence, and his anger grew with LBJ, deciding not to pursue not only the assassins of JFK, but what he believed to be the assassins who murdered his mother. From here, he turned to revenge and spent the rest of his life pursuing the truth behind the assassins and actions to seek revenge, if not in this life, in immortality. On March the 30th, 1966, he was in the park at night in front of Hotel Stockholm, meeting a man with two beautiful women Russian agents. Was extremely angry for Washington, D.C. sending him to meet with this man and to provide women for the party inside. However, he was also happy to be able to find more information regarding the JFK assassination. The man who traveled in the cabin car on the train from Vladivostok spoke to Jack about George the Mournchild. Inside the hotel, both Olof Palme and Martin Luther King were there. Both would later be assassinated. The then Prince of Sweden, now King of Sweden, was likely inside. I can't confirm that part. But Jack did say he could persuade the Prince of Sweden to do anything he wanted so long as he supplied him with beautiful women. It was not until a book was written in 2010 that exposed the King of Sweden as being a sex addict and his favorite was Soviet bloc prostitutes. And here was Jack supplying those Soviet bloc prostitutes, only they were not prostitutes, they were agents, operatives. Reflected back for just a brief moment, the first clue to a mystery culprit in the JFK assassination is alluded to in the movie You Only Live Twice that came out in 1967, after Jack's meeting with the Soviet asset in 1966. It says that Jack was then able to find where this culprit went into hiding. It matches up with the CIA asset that went into hiding around that time. This particular CIA asset was in the South China Sea studying civilian vessels during a stint in the Navy in the South China Sea. Ian Fleming died in 1964, but as the movies continued to be made over the following 60 years, Jack would be contacted for his input in the movies. He lived out his days paranoid of assassination and an anger for not being able to recognize for all that he had done while he was alive. More than anything, he wanted to be recognized as an artist for the creation of these stories. We can't go over all of the movies, and I'm not going to read the rest of this, but the one movie I want to mention is A View to a Kill. That movie presents how they use Jack in one of the Trout Memo operations. Operation Mincemeat is in that. In Operation Mincemeat, they use a dead body, plant a bunch of intelligence on it. I think if you followed along, you could see they were planting intelligence on Jack, but he was alive. That is where they took him to Roosevelt. It was Admiral Godfrey that came up with the Trout memos. There he is, sending Jack into Japan with this intelligence as a live man. That is portrayed in the movie A View to a Kill. Now, here's the anger. That movie, in the end, portrays the Port Chicago disaster. It also makes references to a particular thorium-type atomic bomb, which I'm going to let William describe that. The point is that there are conspiracies and beliefs that the Port Chicago disaster was actually an atomic bomb test, and they tested it on American naval dock workers. And those guys, they call the Port Chicago 50, you should look it up, they mutinied. And FDR went after them brutally and sent many of them to prison. It wasn't until the year 2020 that they were actually um, forgiven by the president. So his skipping through that part, that's the that movie. His efforts of revenge, such as humiliating Lyndon Johnson, the Verde's Horror, The Man with the Golden Gun, and other acts of revenge, the negative portrayal of events in the movies. Jack's security access was revoked. They did not tell him. He discovered this when he tried to go onto the roof of the building, and he was not allowed. This is referenced in, I'm gonna guess, somewhere around 1970, before or after 1 or 2 years. But that revoking, he said he tried to go on a roof. And then that is portrayed in the movie Skyfall. At the end, Moneypenny comes up to James Bond. They're on a roof. She says, I thought we're not allowed to be up here. That's that parallel to that existence in his life. While throughout my life I learned about the amazing things that Jack did and his, it wasn't until 2018 when I decided to firmly begin interviewing him. I thought I was going to learn about the birth of the World Wide Web, since I knew he was involved in that, and it was AT&T long lines that built the backbone of the World Wide Web. Also, my parents told me that Jack could have been president of AT&T if he wanted it to. At the time, AT&T was the largest company in the world, so that would be a huge position. Only now I know he could have never taken on such a public position. When I sat down with him to interview him and ask him about his job, he said he did not like his job because he feared assassination. I spent the following year and a half interviewing him, over 85 hours of recorded audio. So then he died May 13th, 2020. Thank you for listening. It was 100 years trying to condense as best I could. So for William, we've got where he went to Inner Mongolia to see something in late August, early September 1945. And that's Dwight Ryder's research that I'd like to allow you to describe a little bit of the Thin Man and the Port Chicago theory.
Now, this part of it, the Port Chicago possibility is interesting, but I'm just going to say that that's not one that I'm going. That's not a hill that I'm going to die on. Fair enough. Okay, but fair enough. Now, yeah, you mentioned there are some really um, just very strange and very notable mentions in the movie having to do with thorium. Now, here's a little bit of background here. This is thorium 232. Now, we hear a lot about uranium 235, plutonium 239. These are the atomic weights in the nuclei of individual atoms. That's the neutrons and the protons in the in the nucleus. So thorium 232 is about 3 to 4 times as abundant in the Earth's crust as uranium is. Thorium can be used either by electronuclear breeding, that's particle accelerators, or in a reactor to produce uranium 233. Uranium 233 is a highly fissile element. It is most similar to plutonium. It is a man made fissile material. Now, everybody forgets about this, but there was significant consideration given among all of the nuclear powers, or I should say, the warring powers in World War II, when they first began to develop nuclear weapons. Considerable thought was given to making thorium-based bombs. Now, here's where the possible connection to Port Chicago comes in. A CIA researcher by the name of Tony Toluba, Toluba, he is referenced in Wilcox's book, the third edition of Japan's Secret War. I corresponded with Tony personally because Dwight Ryder, whom Charles just mentioned, he's now deceased. Dwight Ryder had been a CIA and DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and also private sector intelligence analyst. He also did targeting research for the U.S. Air Force. Dwight knew Tony. But anyway, Tony sought out Robert Wilcox during the six-party talks where the United States and Japan were trying to rein in the North Korean nuclear weapons program via negotiation. And Tuluba and his people had been doing their own research into the World War II Japanese nuclear weapons program as part of the background to the six-party talks. So that's how that came to be. Well, the State Department told Tuluba and Dwight, by the way, separately, to cease and desist. Why? Because the North Korean nuclear weapons program is built on the bones of the World War II Japanese version. And Japan didn't want that getting out because that was part of their tacit understanding at the end of World War II. United States agrees to look the other way at the direct involvement of Hirohito and the Japanese royal family in financing and developing Japanese weapons of mass destruction, including their atomic bomb program. And in exchange, the United States gets a peaceful occupation of Japan with little or no insurgency. That was the deal. And Japan still considered this arrangement to be in effect during the six-party talks, now more than 20 years ago. So Tuluba was ordered to cease and desist, so he contacted Wilcox and started telling him some things. And in some of this came out, well, actually everything I'm telling you came out in this email chain in which I participated along with Dwight, Robert Wilcox, and several other researchers. Okay. Now, Tuluba said that the Thin Man design, which was the first or one of the first Manhattan Project concepts for an atomic bomb. You've heard of Fat Man. This was the Thin Man bomb. Now, they called it the Thin Man bomb because it was very long. It was a long tube, much longer than the Little Boy bomb. And I had always read that the reason for that is that they intended it to be fueled by plutonium. And reactor-bred plutonium, unless it is very thoroughly reprocessed, you've heard that term, plutonium reprocessing, unless that's done, there's a substantial risk of pre-detonation because of the impurities that send off, they fire off neutrons all over the place. Now, that problem in real life was solved through reprocessing and through implosion, making the plutonium weapon an implosion bomb. But the Thin Man, which preceded it, the idea was that because of the risk of pre-detonation, the two subcritical pieces of plutonium were located very far apart, like more than 20 feet. I think it was even more than that, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why they called it the Thin Man bomb. However, Tony Tuluba said, no, that's not correct. The Thin Man bomb was originally intended to be fueled by uranium-233, produced from thorium. Now, that's very interesting because I've seen Manhattan Project papers where these are just early conceptual, scholarly papers, where they talk about the utility or potential utility of thorium, which again is 3 to 4 times as abundant on Earth as uranium. Now, after World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States, and more recently India, all produced substantial quantities of it. The United States, India, and the Soviets / Russians all set off test bombs, prototypes that were powered by uranium-233. But it seems to have been kind of kicked to the curb, which is a very strange thing, and I have some other thoughts on that for another time. But so anyway, to tie this perhaps into Port Chicago. Now, the explosion at Port Chicago was gigantic. I have read that the estimate was perhaps 10 kilotons. Now, to be sure, they were handling large quantities of conventional bombs, munitions, gunpowder, artillery shells, aerial bombs. So, I mean, there was gigantic potential for explosion here anyway. However, the Manhattan Project took quite an interest in Port Chicago after this event. And that has fueled speculation that maybe there was a nuclear angle here. Now, if there was, and the tendrils here are very thin, and again, I'm not officially endorsing this, I'm just saying it's interesting. Now, maybe these Manhattan Project officials, and I believe one of them was Parsons, who was overseeing the fusing on the Little Boy bomb, but they came to Port Chicago to look at the destruction. And one of these Manhattan Project officials said, well, it looks like a 10 kiloton gadget went off here, gadget being slang for an atomic bomb. So basically, Tuluba said, the Thin Man bomb, which all the histories say was abandoned in 1943 due to concerns over pre-detonation of plutonium, no, it was intended to be fueled by uranium-233. Officially, that was also abandoned. Was it? Maybe they slapped together a uranium-233 bomb. Maybe this gets into the reports of earlier testing of a weapon than what we see in the history books. Uranium-233, if it's reactor produced, also has impurities that can lead to pre-detonation. You see where I'm going with this. Is it possible that a Thin Man bomb with uranium-233 in it was being shipped for use in the Pacific Theater and maybe one of these cooked off? Is that what happened at Port Chicago? I doubt it, but I'm saying that, and Tuluba said the same thing. He threw a few of these talking points out, and there was also a report of a massive detonation somewhere in the Australian outback, which is interesting because Australia is where the Brits tested some of their atomic bombs after World War II. But there's reports of a rancher witnessing a gigantic explosion in the outback during the war. What was that? Was that a test of a U-233 bomb? Was there another aspect of the Manhattan Project that is off the books because of this horrible accident? Is that what Port Chicago was? Okay. All right. Now, as far as Japanese nuclear weapon testing, there are two that are alleged. The more well-known one appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper in the fall of 1945 or early 1946. That's the famous David Snell story. Snell was a very reputable newsman for NBC and many other entities and so on. You can find that story yourself today. Now the other one is somewhere in Mongolia, Inner Mongolia. Now there are allusions to this. There's a mention in Dwight Ryder's paper that Charles mentioned. Apparently there was a report of a Japanese test, a second one. Whether this was an indigenously produced Japanese bomb, whether it was a cold test, whether it was a test of a hybrid German-Japanese weapon or a Japanese license-built copy of a German weapon, I don't know. But it is noteworthy that there are OSS files that mention this. Now, Dwight told me before he died that the code name here was Ramona. I don't know if that's true because I haven't been to the archives to check it. I can tell you that Azusa is the OSS code word for the NARA files, the NARA OSS files.
There was a possible test there as well. So, Tim, thank you so much for having us here.
The 2 hour mark. I have to go at the 2 hour mark. So we still have 18 minutes left. So we're good to go. But no, I do have to. I have to tend to my kids who are like running around downstairs. So
I got well. I mean, I know William got a lot more information on the Inner Mongolia one, and Jack went there after that supposed time that in theory happened.
Well, now the really interesting thing there is that Jack seemed to be describing perhaps a combat use of a Japanese bomb at the tail end of World War II. So that would have been separate from the second ostensible, alleged, reported Japanese test. And, again, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done there. But, Charles, I know you've mentioned that Jack repeatedly made reference to heavy water, which I find quite interesting because most German designs did utilize deuterium, heavy water, as a means of fusion boosted fission, that is, amplifying the detonation of an otherwise standard fission bomb, and is much more efficient. And by the way, also typically used in smaller, lighter nuclear weapons, which we know the Germans developed during World War II. So again, the Inner Mongolia test perhaps leading to a combat use of a Japanese license-built or indigenous or German-influenced or hybrid German-Japanese bomb. Remember, too, that if this was a tactical nuclear weapon, probably with sub-kiloton yield, or maybe a kiloton at best, we're not talking the kind of end-of-the-world doomsday weapons that appeared later in the Cold War.
Well, if I'm right about it, about the Halar crater, which nobody knows why it's there, that's 300 meters wide. That was a big explosion. And I know I'm wrong about that one, but it is right there where there's all this research and people stating that there was an atomic bomb blast at that location.
Okay, well, and if so, maybe that was a test of a much bigger, more powerful device. Again, there is a lot of research here that needs to be done, but for sure, and this again gets back to what we mentioned last time about Matsuwa Island possibly being a courier, part of a courier network between Germany and Japan, or maybe even one of the sites where Japan might have been doing certain aspects of atomic bomb research and development. But anyway, the German and Japanese and broader Axis atomic bomb effort was much bigger and much further advanced than the post-war English language histories have it up through 1995. There were occasional whispers, occasional newspaper stories, people that would let one thing or another slip, and you do really have to dig for these, but they do exist. But again, the dam burst in 1995. That's when NARA really began the process of declassifying these documents. And since then, a great deal has come to light. Exactly how far Japan got is still unclear, and the Japanese themselves have not been forthcoming. Of all the major powers in the Second World War, they've been the most tight-lipped about all of this. But I will tell you one quick story that you guys will get a big kick out of. Now, all right, in 2002, the BBC ran a story called Atomic Plans Returned to Japan. You can look that up. Now, that was from Kazuo Kuroda, Kuroda, who died in 2001. He was a wartime Japanese scientist, industrial chemist who worked on their atomic bomb program. At the end of the war, he was given a copy of notes from an engagement that Yoshio Nishina gave to the Japanese Army Ordnance personnel about the progress of their atomic bomb program. All of these papers were supposed to be burned at the end of the war, but somebody gave a copy to Kuroda, who got away to America. I'm not making this up. He became a professor of chemistry at the University of Arkansas. For many years, he would bring his PhD students over to his house, and he'd pull out these World War II documents and show it to his doctoral students. I mean, it's astonishing. But anyway, so when he died, his widow returned these papers to the Riken Institute north of Tokyo. That's where the Japanese Army had their research and development headquarters. That's where Nishina was, and where Philip Morrison interviewed Nishina. Philip Morrison, the Manhattan Project scientist who doubled as an intelligence analyst for the Manhattan Project, he interviewed Nishina personally, and that's quite a story. We don't have time to go into that right now. But anyway, the cool part about that is that when Wilcox got wind of this, after I told him, by the way, that's when I called Wilcox to tell him about the BBC story, and that's when he got the idea to do the third edition of Japan's Secret War. So I was there at the beginning of that. But anyway, so Wilcox goes to visit Kuroda's widow and his three children. He had two daughters and one son. So the daughters don't want to hear anything about this. They're properly horrified that their father was working on nuclear weapons, right? But the son was like, "Wait, you mean Pops was trying to build nukes? Cool." so so there you go. The difference between women and men, sons and daughters. So there's a story about the Japanese.
But I want to one thing on
Oh,
that. I'm going to have
well,
to catch
possible.
up to you
Yeah,
later.
possible
I
they would have
wonder if
crossed
that
paths.
is
I
the
wouldn't be
guy that
surprised.
knew Jack's childhood friend. If you remember me sharing that with you, I'll bring it up later. The guy that became the chief editor of the American chemistry, and he worked with the Japanese atomic scientist, the guy that came up with spontaneous fission. But look, I just want to let's give some time here. Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much. I know it's a lot for you to do these, and you've been working so hard. I can see you've done like almost 40 in 3 months. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No, I thank you both, and you guys are a staple of our show, and our audience loves you, and my respect for you guys is absolutely incredible. So I'm honored to have you guys on. Like I said, I want to do this once monthly, and hopefully we can make this a full series, so we can get people to actually stream the full, project. I mean, like we have a lot to go. We have a lot to where to go. So
Anywhere you want to take it, and more than anything, like I really want to learn more from you. When you told me about Igor, now it's just like I have put together so many pieces about him, and it's you could do a whole show perhaps. But thank you. I think you can help a lot here.
yeah, well, thank you. And I thought there was a lot of meat on the bone with Igor too. Like in the beginning of the episode, I thought there was so much that we could discover with that. So we will get to that in future episodes. But I think we also need to get it into just again more of the Bond stuff, also World War II, and especially what the Tokyo intelligence that William has. I mean, like it's impressive, and let's just continue it. I mean, like let's make this like a series that keeps going on and on and on. I mean, like I think our audience is going to really like love this, and yeah, they're going to be really. I mean, we already have a core audience on this one, and so I'm really impressed by what
Wherever
we
you want to
have,
take it,
and I'm grateful to both
and
of you
I
for your time.
I can't express enough. If you meet Todd Ryder and you have him present, my God, you'll be tremendously impressed. He's got a great presentation. It's not as boring as me sitting here reading. He's got a fantastic presentation.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, like you and William are amazing. So yeah, absolutely. I'd love to have. I mean, let's expand this whole series. I mean, like let's keep making it work because any way that we can keep looking into the corruption of the government and anything that we can do to expose that and anything that we can do to touch points, especially in all of our fields. I mean, like that's a huge thing. So.
I think you're making a lot of progress here and a lot of impact, and you're getting a lot of traction. I think the field of JFK is really looking at you very closely, and it is a lot more than just setting up a website and putting copies of documents on it and a bunch of nonsense articles. You're doing a lot more.
Thank you, Charles. You've always been a dear friend. So has William, and you both have been really supportive of me, and I appreciate you both so much. And look, I mean, I have a quarrel with the main guy in this industry right now, and it's only because I feel like we're being gated. But I mean, it is what it is. But you guys are, I mean, the truth is out there for everybody. And both you guys, I mean, you both are really like opening up the doorways to the truth. And that's why I have so much respect for both you guys. So, I mean, I know this is a big love.
Well, yeah, and well, yeah, and appreciate that, Timothy. And again, I will tell you that if I get to the point where where I got an attorney on retainer, I'll tell you who it is that I've gone toe to toe with several times on the internet. And
Well, none of us are naming names at the minute, either way.
yeah, we're
So
not going to do
we
that
all
yet.
do.
But I will tell you, I already told you the one war story about just the one guy on Quora. This gentleman was on Reddit, and he is a Wikipedia editor. That's all I'm going to say right now. People can look this up if they want to, but he when I have presented some of this information to him, he shrieks, turns pale, rends his garment, and starts shouting hysterically that he is a professional historian and Todd Ryder isn't, and so that's the whole end of the matter. And I'm like, okay, okay, you, sir, are at this entity over here, which again I can't tell you who it is because if I do, you'll know immediately who I'm talking about. Then he'll sue me, and I don't have money for a lawyer right now. But anyway, Todd Ryder was an MIT senior staff scientist. He graduated from MIT. He's been a biomedical researcher. He has patented antiviral treatments. He's worked on nuclear fusion research for the U.S. Navy. What conceivable motive could a guy like that, a polymath intellectual of that caliber, what conceivable motive could he possibly have to lie about something like this? And again, you don't have to go any further than look in his book. It's called Forgotten Creators. There's more than 1,000 pages of photos of documents that he dug out of archives. He traveled all over the world. These are wartime, original, secret.
Let me let me interrupt you just for a minute, William. In the JFK industry, there are a lot of fantastic researchers, and this individual that I believe we're talking about within the JFK industry, I really have a problem with how much he poo-poos so much of it. There are a lot of respected researchers there. They don't deserve to get poo-pooed either. But I want to let Timothy, Tim, how do you want to wrap this up? We got 4 minutes.
Well, I guess rant over. I guess that's yeah. No, that's all right. I totally get it. And listen, man, you know what, I hate to tell you this, but I've lost my temper a couple of times too. I've been not only was I blocked from Reddit, although that was just because this guy is a weenie and doesn't want to engage with the latest research. But I was completely banned from another website called Secret Projects. That's in the United Kingdom. And again, I presented all this information. And then what happened was a researcher from Europe comes on, and a legitimate guy like you're talking about, a very respectable researcher. In fact, this guy has been digging into these files for 20 years, and he's now joined the research community around Todd Ryder that Charles and I are part of. So this guy comes on to the Now remember, this is a website that is ostensibly about secret projects, whether they actually saw the light of day or whether they were Napkinwaffe or somewhere in between. Okay, and I've another really weird phenomenon that I've noticed on websites like that, or like alternate history websites, is invariably they get taken over by people who just want to maintain the conventional narrative. And I'm like, well, that's very strange. Isn't this supposed to be a site where we're specifically questioning the accepted conventional narrative? And why is all this effort being expended by these people to poo-poo all this, as you say? Well, ergo leading directly to my suspicions that they're being paid to do it. But anyway, so this guy from Europe comes in. He's from Spain, totally legitimate, very good research. and he was asking about a German secret weapon project that I had never heard of. It was an explosive code named Radgum, capital R, capital A, capital D, small GUM. I'm still not sure. It's an acronym of some kind. I'm not sure exactly what that was, but that's what he was asking about. And so the owner of Secret Projects responds, well, we had someone in here. That's a reference to me. We had someone in here, a while ago that was, saying this, that, and the other. But I think this topic is better put in our little nook over here for conspiracy theories. I went berserk. I said to the guy, I said, look, if you had a website called kittens.uk and somebody came on and asked you a question about cats, would you say you should take that over to the conspiracy theory nook? Would you kick him off? What is wrong with you? So, I mean, I just went completely, you know, I was ape poop. I was like an ape throwing poop in
And
the
we are not James File type.
yeah, no. So I get it, Tim. And then they banned me, and I actually went back after that to try and log in, and there was a note there saying I had been banned for bad research and being a pain in the ass.
Yeah, we're good. Charles, do you have any last words before we end the show?
Really, I think a lot of people appreciate you, and that's all I can say. Thank you.
No. That means a lot to me. Thank you so much. And we should do this. So let's mark around the same time every month. Let me. So you guys want to do either the 17th or the 19th every month. So let's do that because this will be a stable for what we're doing. That way.
We can definitely come up with something. And honestly, my God, if we can get Todd Ryder, William, you're on that, okay?
I'll reach out to him immediately.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. The truth is out there. Thank you guys so much. Have a good night.